So it's actually today my first conference speech, so I'm quite happy to be here, and I hope you'll find it as interesting, but I find it is. So the wood. The wood was used in construction and boat building for, sorry, just for...
It's the one down there by the glasses.
Yeah, is it working?
That one should work.
Okay, so used in construction and boat building for domestic productions or as fuel source, wood was a key material for medieval North European societies. For people living in medieval Scandinavia, tree and timber were actually common in both the landscapes and the mythology, and therefore were an essential cultural item. The three largest medieval assemblages of wooden artifacts for medieval period are the one from Novgorod in Russia, Hedeby in Denmark, and York in Scotland. And they both demonstrate the wide variety of objects that can be unearthed when preservation conditions are good enough. Several studies have been conducted on the topic of wood use in Scandinavia, or the British Isles, or the North Atlantic Islands, the most recent being that of Dan Moody's study in Iceland in 2016. Despite these recent analyses, the study of wood use is still a poorly known topic in the North Atlantic, and this is unfortunate since numerous collections are available, and this kind of study raises important questions related to timber procurement and use in a changing historical and environmental context. The goal of my doctoral research is to obtain specific data on the wood species, both locals and imported, used by Greenland inhabitants, in order to better understand and retrace the origin and circulation of wood resources at the border of the Scandinavian world. The overreaching question is, what is the nature of the Greenland Norse society woodworking strategies and management, and should it be understood in terms of cultural dynamics or adaptive strategies? In my paper today, I'm presenting results of the first wood analysis conducted on 158 wooden artifacts from composite containers from two sites called Sennes and Umivjarsuk, located in the western settlement in Greenland. The study of lift-turned and hand-cut vessels is ongoing and will soon complete those first results. Starting around the second half of the 9th century, the Norse colonized Iceland and reached Greenland in 985 or 986, settling two main areas known as the eastern and the western settlements. Apart from their short and temporary settlement in Newfoundland, Greenland settlements can be considered the most northern and eastern establishments of the Scandinavian world. For about 5 centuries, Norse society flourished in Greenland, dotting the landscape of about 600 sites, most of them located in the eastern settlement. Greenland colonies offers an optimal field of research to question the operating strategies of this marginal land and the types of relationships Norse Greenland had with the outer world. In terms of climate and environment, the time period under study is marked by two main climatic events that impacted all of the North Atlantic region. The medieval warm period, global warming between the 8th and the 14th century, followed by abrupt and stable cooling, known as the Little Ice Age, begins around the 14th century and ends at the end of the 19th century, depending. These two well-known climatic events have impacted positively and negatively what Norse societies were able to do and where they could travel within the region. Studying wood production on the Norse colonies in Greenland can be a way to analyze the effect of climate deterioration on Norse societies in terms of progressive redistribution of mobility, trade, and resources exploitation strategies. Since such changes are known in Norse societies and the material culture, my goal is to study this time transition through the eyes of wooden productions and objects. Norse sites in the eastern and the western settlements are located in the southern Greenland, separated by about 400 kilometers. Norse farms were usually located at the end of the fjords, into sheltered valleys where lush vegetation was found, organized in network, usually with a major site controlling a set of medium-range sites. They were composed of barns, stables, living areas, workshops. Sandnes Farm is close to the shores of Ameralik Fjord, while Umivjærsuk is located in the interior. Both sites' environment is characterized by willow groves, which, I quote, measure twice the size of a man, according to the Danish archaeologist Aage Rose, who led the excavation in the 1930s. Umivjærsuk Farm is more an operative and storage center for agricultural resources, whereas Sandnes, with this church, was probably like the nerve center of the Western colony. Both farms were first excavated in the 1930s, and recent research have clarified the chronology. We now know that Sandnes Farm has been settled around 990 and probably a little later for Umivjærsuk, and both sites were still actually populated in the early 15th century. Excavation at both sites yielded hundreds of wooden artifacts, among them stave-built containers, also called the copper vessels. Stave-built vessels were used in almost all everyday life activities, such as carrying water, preparing and consuming meals, processing milk products, without forgetting, of course, people's personal hygiene. The size of these containers are that of the buckets, the tubs, chamber pots, churns, bowls, and all kinds of storage vessels. Coppering, which is a craft that requires specialized skills, was also used to produce large barrels and casks for commercial purposes. And so, since commercial containers are good markers of goods flows, their study might help to better understand the circulation of both objects and men. So the methodology I use is basically first xylology and dendrometry analysis, so the study of macroscopic and microscopic wood features to identify the wood species and characteristics related to its quality as a raw material. Dendrometry analysis concerns the study of growth rings and the identification of what we could call wood defects, such as the knots, for example, or the grain straightness, to infer wood quality and conditions of tree growth. The analysis of tree ring is also used in the technological study as a way to infer wood processing and cutting strategies. Then, typology and morphometry are used to highlight the variability, recurrences, similarities, and morphological differences within the collection. Finally, the analyzing technology helps with providing information about manufacturing processes, uses, and damages of objects, and may allow determining the rate of skills involved in the making of the objects. Cut marks left on artifacts are recorded and analyzed so as to infer tool signatures called the stigma. In addition to this analysis, medieval written records will be used to help specifying the significance of wooden materials in trade across the North Atlantic, for example, through the King's Mirror, in the context of shipments, and in context of shipments from Markland, we could say the saga of the Greenlanders, for example. So over the 90 artifacts I have been identified, with the microscope, 5 taxa were identified, all coniferous: spruce, larch, juniper, and 2 different pine species, the Scott pine and the white pine. An anatomical distinction of spruce and larch, as Dan told you, is well-known difficulty, increased here because of the poor artifacts preservation. This explains that 54% of artifacts were left as undifferentiated PCR lyrics. Nevertheless, 36% were identified as PCR and 10% as lyrics. In total, that's 75% identified. The collection is made of spruce and or larch. In addition, 5 artifacts are identified as Scott pine and 5 others as white pine, while only one is unspecified pinus species. Its preservation was actually too poor to identify. In total, 13% of the corpus is made of pine wood. 7 samples, only staves actually, were identified as juniper, and 4 samples were, unfortunately, left unidentified, coniferous trees anyway. About the typology of the containers, criteria such as height, width, thickness, or the presence and dimensions of the groove were recorded, as well as any observed decorations, traces of bindings, and handles. 3 vessel types were recognized following archaeologist and wood specialist Pierre Mille 1989 typology for medieval buckets. The type A, containers with inward edges, type B, with straight and cylindrical walls, and type C, the truncated containers. No staves with 2 grooves were one for the bottom and one for the lid were found, which indicates that only opened containers are present in the collection. However, this doesn't mean that all containers were actually opened, and some may have had removable lids. 3 stoppers two stoppers, one bag were identified, so that means that closed containers were actually, such as barrels, casks, kegs, may have been closed and used for the commercial activities. We need to make a distinction between parts that are a composite and those made out of a single piece of wood. Staves were always made of one piece of wood, a split board subsequently carved, while bottoms and lids were sometimes made of 2 pieces of wood held together by wooden pegs. These were probably originally single parts that were then repaired over the time. Regarding design, staves are only rarely decorated, whereas bottom and lids are nearly all covered with incised concentric circles and even sometimes runic inscriptions or Christian symbols. We also have some handle staves, and the distinction is made between the composite handle staves and those that are made of a single piece of wood. About the technology analysis, a number of cut marks and use wear were recorded on the artifacts that show technical actions such as splitting, recycling, etc. that inform on the reduction process of the wood and the making and maintaining of the composite objects and parts. Some cut marks are due to actions related to shaping wood fragments into parts of stave-built containers. Some marks and traces are related with binding staves together and wear of the wood due to using the containers. Other stigma are directly linked to the repair and reuse of the stave-built containers. I'm sorry, I have a lot of things to say about it, but I'm running out of time. So.
You have five more minutes.
Yeah, that's what So the different types of containers identified in Sennes and Umivjärsup are quite similar to other Norse and Scandinavian collections in the North Atlantic and Northern Europe. There's a majority of domestic containers used for everyday life activities, and some stave-built vessels were used as tableware, and actually I have a lot of pint cups, like the volumes are between 45 and 57 centiliters. So. The absence of wall containers and large wood pieces and the importance of recycling and repairs suggests that Norse inhabitants in Greenland were aware of the difficulty to obtain proper wood and so were careful to use and reuse wooden artifacts up to the hilt. 1/4 of the container bottom show very clear marks of reuse, most often as cutting boards. At both Sennes and Umivjärsup, only general woodworking tools have been discovered. We know that splitting was done by using axe and wedges, roughing by using axe adze, shaping and finishing by using small axes and different kind of knives. Other studies have revealed that more specific tools could be used, especially for copperage. So, local species growing, what are the wood supply sources available to the Norse in Greenland? First, the local species growing in Greenland. That would be, for me, the juniper, which is endogenous in Greenland. Those 7 staves actually may have been repairs of buckets made of different wood type, but they were using juniper to repair. There is also driftwood that is to be found on the shores. There is the problem with distinction between driftwood and imported wood. So since Tom has talked a little about it, I'm not going to say more. And then we come to the imported goods, actually. Researchers such like Jette Arnborg and Kirsten Sewer think that importations of wood from Europe were less important than those from Markland. Going further, we can also assume that importations of wooden resources were not even that essential for Norse Greenlanders, as they had plenty of local woods, more driftwood actually, at their disposal, at least for the first centuries of the settlement. The absence of deciduous species for making buckets is quite interesting, because the oak, for example, is often used and is still considered nowadays particularly suitable wood for cask manufacture. So we can say Norse coopers in Greenland preferred coniferous wood with good splitting properties rather than local trees that may have been more difficult to work. However, the results are only based on 2 sites and so far, and further studies will be needed to confirm this. Finally, we can mention the reuse of ship parts and wrecks. Wood could have been a complementary supply source of timbers, but in all cases, it cannot be considered as a primary source for raw material procurement. So my results are, I know, very preliminary at this stage, but 3 questions emerges, and after I'm done. First, is the exploitation of wooden resources uniform across and between the 2 main settlements in Greenland, or will it be possible to identify local and regional specificities in wood use and management? The second question, is the exploitation of wooden resources uniform across the occupation of the whole island, or will it be possible to identify shifts, periods related to environmental, climatic, or economical changes? And the third question is, are there, like in Iceland for the same period, specific regulations related to using and managing wooden resources and driftwood in particular? And so, what is the status of wooden resources in the North Atlantic economy and more generally in the medieval North Atlantic trade? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elie. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, thanks for a really great talk. One of the questions I wanted to ask was, I'm not that familiar with kind of the ocean currents and driftwood deposition around Greenland, but where are the driftwood beaches? Are they close to the settlements? Because I know at least in Iceland, and I guess everywhere else, the fjords themselves don't have a lot of driftwood deposition just because the currents are very slow there. Everything gets kind of deposited where it hits land first before coming into the fjords.
Yep.
So I was wondering where they are and if
Okay,
you think about transport.
I guess that most of them are located in what we can call the Western settlement, actually. And so that's why I guess it's going to be really interesting to compare with assemblages from the both settlements to see. Nowadays, driftwood, you can find a lot of driftwood in the Western, the Nuuk, actually, fjord area. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember the name of this book, the source exactly, but in the 18th century, I guess, or early 19th century, when Danish people came back to Greenland, there is one explorer telling us there is actually a lot of driftwood in the beaches all along in the Nuuk area. Yeah, there are also driftwood. You can find driftwood beaches in the south, to the eastern settlement, but it looks like it's not that important actually.
Okay.
Because the East Greenland current comes this way, and I guess for this specific west coast called the Eastern settlement, it looks like it's some kind of a microcosm, and it's not that much driftwood actually. All driftwood comes all around, but not in this particular place. There is some driftwood, but not that much.
I guess that's a factor in sort of settling there as well, as that the cold Arctic currents aren't coming to that part so much. So
I think the explorer you're talking about is it could be Hans Egede?
Yeah. Well, but I'm not sure it's the one who has written this.
Okay, because I know he
specific
described
thing.
a lot about.
I can find it.
Yeah.
Look.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned that juniper in the assemblage you're looking at is used exclusively for staves, not top, not bottoms. And you also mentioned that it could have been used as repair on vessels of other species. Is that because juniper is sort of a secondary, of secondary quality or secondary attractiveness? Is there some reason it's only used for staves? Is it particularly good for that, or not particularly good for other things?
Well, actually, it's a really good question, and I don't have any proper answer, because what I just realized is, well, in one, first you have the juniper wood. I identified it's only in one site, not in Umiverse, but only in Sennis. So first, what does it mean? Maybe nothing, but maybe it means something. Second, the growth ring for junipers were very, very narrow. So that makes the wood actually quite interesting to work, because it's going to be quite like hard, and so suitable for staves, and especially handle staves, which are to be broken quite easily if you are not like. Yeah.
I was just wondering, going on from that, are any of the juniper staves carved, or is there the sort of density of growth rings?
No, actually, no.
Okay.
The only carved were, I guess, driftwood or, well, spruce larch.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I'm a bit ignorant about this, is there some way of telling whether a piece of white pine or Pinus sylvestris has been in the water as driftwood, or it's been cut and brought over, without having these wormy things in them that you sometimes get?
I wouldn't say for sure. I mean, as down, I'm waiting a lot for the driftwood meeting. No, well, actually, I don't know if it's maybe you know. But
I can half answer that. There are kind of marine fungi that might be found. But the problem is, there are definitely things that can identify fresh driftwood, modern driftwood. But from an archaeological context, it becomes
kind
much
of
more complex.
Yeah, especially when, well, so like the artifacts I was working on were excavated in the late 30s, 1930s, and they had some peg conservation thing that looks like honey under the microscope. Like well, it's beautiful in a way, but it's kind of difficult to recognize some specific thing, and even from the interior artifacts. Sometimes you have like those kind of, it looks like chocolate or honey or something in the artifact. And even if there are some fungi traces or stuff, I'm not sure you would be able to recognize them properly.
That's the problem. We need to be able to look at kind of wood straight when it's come out on site, because all the assemblages I looked at as well have been conserved with this polyethylene glycol stuff, and it obscures so many of the features, and that's why as well, like even sort of the spruce and larch differentiation is difficult, because you need to get into really fine detail, and it's so often obscured. So yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Well, we have 5 minutes before we start the next lecture, so if anybody wants to take, we could take a quick break, very short break.